Welcome, friends. Today I was going to discuss shapes and the possibility of new relative imagery. Imagery, when creating with shapes, lines, words, is the way to show what you see so you can communicate with others like me. Learning to create basic shape and form takes time and practice developing muscle memory. There are art styles to view for this: Cubism, Art expressionism, and surrealism top that list. So I'll show you just a few images of those. Development of form awareness is twofold in that it provides you the ability to distinguish letters while improving your penmanship. So to make it fun, you need to challenge yourself toward developing these skills. So all levels and abilities can Tetris tracing found object template shapes. But that requires you to find found objects of template shapes. So get to looking around your house, see what you can find. I'll show you what I used in a moment. Of course, there are other options in these in working with shapes and lines, designs, and preparing you for better penmanship. And those are things like doodles of Zentangles, formation of mandalas, and practicing the fonts of script. We are going to use I will use a few of the shapes that I collected to show you a simple design, but I wanted to provide you a more complex design that is an assemblage of all of the shapes that I collected, and I did go ahead and trace it with Sharpie so that you can see it. Use of any of these shapes and being able to draw them well requires time, effort, and consistency. To see improvement on any initial difficulties, if you use a pencil, you can erase any mistake. Just don't stop after the first few times and continue to practice. Whatever compilation you create and choose to share will provide you visual communication between you and the world. It'll bring us all together. So let's get started. I have collected quite a few different things. I collected rectangle shapes of different sizes, cookie cutters, circles of different sizes, any shape that you find you can trace around, you can use. Just set them on your page, trace around, do your best. You can add more designs inside it. There's something very important when you're using template shapes, and that is two things. One, hold that shape down. Don't let it move around. Hold it down and trace around. Hold it down and trace around. If you make a mistake that you're not happy with, simply erase. You can put it back, no big deal. Add more shapes, add more details. You can make it look however you choose. It's your design. Let's look at a few different people's work, shall we? I'm going to start out with Paul Klee. He was an abstract artist in the 1920s. These types of designs typically happened after they became familiar with different forms of music. He loved jazz, And you can see in many of his works how much the notes and symbols played in his work. Of course, I have to show you Pablo Picasso. He also began in the 20s, famous for his whole life. One thing that I've noticed in many of these artists that have decided to use abstract expressionism, surrealism, or even cubism, initially started out doing work for patrons. And their artwork was very detailed, typically picturesque. And they found that they didn't like the confines of having to re-represent whatever their patron wanted them to. This is Matisse. Henri Matisse. The parakeet and the siren. And in their disdain for working for patrons, they started to take their work and instead of making these huge, immense scapes, they began focusing on their favorite repeated shapes. These are both artists that wanted to pay homage to Henri Matisse. We've gotten to a point in our current time frame where we typically will utilize photo collages instead. This is David Hockney. But in our use of these basic shapes, if we choose to and we're familiar with them, we can decide to get more complex. You get to choose with art. Because whereas at one point we went from complex to simple, we can always go from simple to complex. In order to go from simple to complex, you need to know the simple and the basics, and then you can create more complex. The first one with the peacock room, that was Henry Whistler. And then I just showed you Aubrey Beardsley. So, in our looking at those basic things, the main point I needed to show you was in our timeline, we have gone from script and its beautiful serif imagery to not even what initially was a basic Roman text. However, you'll notice in becoming familiar with our basic shapes, we are able to get to a point where these are the building blocks for us being able to recognize and be able to replicate shapes and their construction in letters. I hope you have fun playing with these today. Thank you for joining me.